officials say they are drafting plans to attack not just bin Laden, but the Taliban rulers of Afghanistan who allowed him to operate from their territory, which is killing bin Laden and destroying his camp, or forcing the Taliban.
This is not 1968 and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, where Russia can threaten its neighbors, occupy a capital, overthrow a government, and get away with it. Yes, Anne.
So far, the Russians have either already violated a ceasefire or appear to, as both you and the President have said today. If that's the case, why is today's response humanitarian aid and further diplomatic outreach? Hasn't the time come for you to say or do something that carries a larger threat?
If indeed Russia is violating a ceasefire, and I have to say that the reports are not encouraging about Russia's respect for the ceasefire, for the pledge that it undertook, that will only serve to deepen the isolation into which Russia is moving. It will only serve to deepen the very strong growing sense that Russia is not behaving like the kind of international partner that it has said that it wants to be. And it's very clear to me that the consequences of that, which are already quite significant, because the way that Russia has brutally pushed this military operation well beyond the bounds of anything that might have related to South Ossetia, calls into question Russia's suitability for all kinds of activities that it has said that it wants to be a part of. And so we'll get to that matter in due course. Right now, the key is to remind Russia that it has an obligation to stop its military activities, remind Russia that it is not to further engage in activities that threaten the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Georgia, that it should drop the language concerning the democratically elected government of Georgia that has been thrown around by some Russian officials, and that it's time to stop this so that Russia can begin to dig out of the hole that it's gotten itself into. Yes.
But how can you be an honest broker in the conflict when the Russians see you as too close to the Georgians? I think Lavrov said today that, for the United States, Georgia is their special project.
Georgia is a democratic government in the Caucasus that has elected its leaders. To call it a project of any place, of anybody, perhaps belies more about the way Russia thinks about its neighbors than the way it thinks about U.S. policy. Yes?
President Saakashvili said today that America is losing the entire region. He went on to say that the U.S. made a major mistake by issuing too soft a statement from Washington early on that really gave Russia the green light to go ahead. And just secondly, if I may, Senators Obama and McCain have been having conversations with leaders from Georgia and Russia as well. Does that help or hurt you?
I've also been having conversations with Senators Obama and McCain, and I know that they are at this moment of difficult diplomacy, that they are doing what they can to support the efforts of the administration. Let me just, on the question of honest broker that you asked, I'm sorry I didn't answer that question. Look, the honest thing to do here is to call it as you see it. And what we see is that what has been a long-standing and somewhat volatile conflict did, in fact, boil over. That could have been handled. But now Russia has pushed this well beyond the bounds of the conflict in South Ossetia. And that's what the President was reacting to today. That is why people are questioning the nature of the ongoing relationship with Russia. That's why people are talking about consequences for the kind of relationship that Russia has wished to build with the international community.
Thank you. Today is the day of national mourning in Russia for the losses that occurred in the original aggression in South Ossetia by the Georgians. You well know that. Can you acknowledge the losses? And Also, it has been reported that before the war, the U.S. was urging the Georgians not to respond to provocations, not to do anything rash. So we all know what the Georgians did, ultimately. So how did it happen?
First of all, I am very sorry for any loss of innocent life in any part of the zone of conflict in Georgia or in any other area surrounding this conflict. That is one reason that it is so important to end the fighting. As to the U.S. diplomacy concerning this conflict, you must understand that this has been a volatile area for some time. It has been volatile now for more than a decade. Now, as I said, this is something that, had it been about South Ossetia, could have been resolved within certain limits. Russian peacekeepers were in the area. That is true. And Russia initially said it needed to act to protect its peacekeepers and its people. But what Russia has done is well beyond anything that anyone could say is for the protection of those people and for those peacekeepers. Indeed, by prolonging the conflict, the innocents in the area are in greater danger.
Many people in Russia would say what you did after 9/11 was very disproportionate to the threat and to the actual loss that you incurred. So the Russians are trying to ensure the security of their forces and their citizens and their peacekeepers. And they are moving, they are creating a buffer zone. What's wrong with that? Why can't you do this in Iraq?
I am not going to sit here and judge each Russian military operation. I am going to say that when you start bombing ports and threatening to bomb airfields and bombing a city like Gori and bringing troops in a flanking maneuver on the western flank of Georgia and tying up the main roads between Georgia and between Tbilisi and Gori, that's well beyond anything that is needed to protect Russian peacekeepers, and that is why Russia is starting to face international condemnation for what it is doing. This is not 1968 and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, where Russia can threaten its neighbors, occupy a capital, overthrow a government, and get away with it. Things have changed. And so what Russia, I think, is seeing is that to the degree that this is about South Ossetia, about even Abkhazia, let's accept that it is time to move the forces back. Let's accept that it is time first to end the fighting, move the forces back to August 6th, and then have an international mediation to try to resolve these conflicts within the context of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Georgia.
You just said that this is not 1968 where Russia can do this and get away with it, and you've talked of consequences, but we have yet to really see any. When, at what point, how far, how much further can Russia continue to go before we actually see the United States do something?
But again, that Russia can use its overwhelming regional military power in this way against a small neighbor is obvious. That Russia can do that and bear no consequences for it, or that Russia can push far enough to try and destroy the Georgian state, I think that is what is different. Russia cannot succeed in those.
What if they don't care about these consequences? I mean, the U.S.
Well, we'll see.
Madam Secretary, Russia has obviously, despite repeated warnings from the U.S. not to go this far, has obviously made the choice to escalate this conflict despite the threats of consequences from the United States and the Europeans. So what if they don't care about these consequences?
I've heard the Russian president say that his military operations are over. I am saying that it is time for the Russian president to be true to his word.